Tired of your car insurance rate going up even with a clean driving record? You're not alone. That's why there's Jerry, your proactive insurance assistant. Jerry compares rates side by side from over 50 top insurers and helps you switch with ease. Jerry even tracks market rates and alerts you when it's best to shop. No spam calls, no hidden fees. Drivers who save with Jerry could save over $1,300 a year. Switch with confidence. Download the Jerry app or visit jerry.ai/ACAST today.
Traigan la manguera, que son 45.
Cuando cumples 45, te toca soplar muchas velas y examinarte contra el cáncer de colon, ya que al detectarse temprano es más tratable en 9 de cada 10 personas. Usa la prueba de Cologuard en la privacidad de tu casa y envíala de regreso para obtener tus resultados. La prueba de Cologuard es una opción con receta para detectar el cáncer de colon en personas de 45 años o más con riesgo promedio. Resultados positivos deben ir seguidos de una colonoscopía. Pueden darse resultados falsos positivos y falsos negativos. La prueba de Cologuard no reemplaza la colonoscopía en pacientes de alto riesgo. No uses Cologuard si has tenido adenomas, si tienes enfermedad inflamatoria intestinal y ciertos síndromes hereditarios o un historial personal o familiar de cáncer de colon. Pide la prueba de Cologuard a tu médico. Para más información en español, visita cologuard.com/prueba.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Scary. My name is Will, and each week I narrate your real-life paranormal experiences as well as cover some famous paranormal cases along the way. Before we get into this week's episode, as always, I need to say a special thank you to our new Patreon subscribers, who are Kimberly M, Elizabeth Gill and Nelva Linnell. Thank you so much for signing up to the show's Patreon, and if this is something you're interested in, you can find the link in this episode show notes where you can gain access to exclusive scary episodes as well as ad-free main episodes. I have 3 listener experiences for you in this episode, so now let's get into our first. I've experienced a lot of strange phenomena. I was born in the most haunted town in Gloucestershire, but I thought I'd talk about the day that I died. On that day, I was 26 years old. I'm now 52. And I was having a very routine and simple day surgery. At that point in my life, I'd never been under the knife before, but I was assured that all I would experience was a nice nap and then you'll wake up and be allowed to go home. I don't remember being overly nervous. In my head I was going to be asleep, and when I woke up it would be all over and I could go home and rest properly. Hospitals aren't exactly conducive to a good night's sleep, and neither is my partner snoring, but that's by the by. The last thing I remembered was the anaesthetist counting down after he'd administered the anaesthetic, and all was going to plan until I felt like I was suddenly yanked out of my body, as though I had to leave it in a hurry. I remember looking around and feeling the cold floor beneath my bare feet, and I was wondering how I could possibly be standing in the theatre if I was on the table being worked on. I just thought, was this what an anaesthesia dream was like? It was while I was wandering around that I noticed the painting in the corner. I can't remember what it was now. It was only gradually that I became aware of the noise and activity behind me. I turned and I remember creeping towards the surgeons and thinking, what was that alarm? Why did I have an oxygen bag over my face with someone frantically squeezing it? Who was this team of people hurrying in? Why was the heart monitor showing a flat line? And then I suddenly realised that I was looking down at my own body. And as I began to panic, I seemed to be pulled back inside the figure lying, surrounded by monitors and people, and someone frantically looking at that flat line on the monitor while they kept time of the minutes and seconds, hoping to see the line jump as my heart began to beat again. The last thing I remembered before waking up in recovery was this, what I would call a jolt or a solid blow to my chest. When I woke up in recovery, they were very quick to put me on a ward. There was no going home for me that day. My family very quickly arrived at my bedside, and I remember saying that I wanted to go outside for a cigarette because I felt fine. And my dad looked at me and said, "Gemma, you are not fine." And his face was the colour of ash, and nobody would tell me why my chest was hurting so much. My then partner told me that the surgeons would be down in the morning to speak with me. I was too out of it to worry too much, if I'm honest, and I just slept. And the following morning, the surgeons did indeed come down to speak to me. And they said, "We're so sorry about your chest. We had to bring you back. You just stopped breathing and you were officially gone for a while." And I looked at them and I said, "Yes, I was stood behind you watching. Your floor is very cold." They definitely seemed surprised, and then they asked me to describe the room. They were especially interested in the picture I'd seen, as there was no way I could possibly have seen it while I was awake due to where I was positioned. And I described it fully to them. They actually told me that they had heard of such phenomena, but it was their first case. And it even transpired that one of them had a fascination with this sort of thing, and he considered that I may have astral projected when I died. Did I astral project, or did I die? I don't know. Perhaps I did both. All I know is that in all the surgery I've needed since then, no such thing has happened again. I go to sleep and then wake up slurring all sorts of rubbish to the nurses. But I'll never forget that day that I witnessed frantic resuscitation attempts on my own dead body. I'll never forget the day that I officially died. Thank you to Gemma for sending in our first paranormal encounter. And now, let's get into our second. My story is more of a series of events, but I thought I'd share, as I'd love to hear someone else tell it. Back when I was 16 in the early 90s, a silly gimmick started between my dad and I. One night he ate a blue ribbon biscuit, the bright blue one, and threw the wrapper at me. So I threw it back, and so the game began. And over the next 15 to 16 years, this wrapper became both our nemesis. I hid it in his work shoes, he hid it in my pencil case, wrapped it in Christmas presents, tucked it in a glove, put it under his pillow, and so on. The trick was to wait a few weeks at least and then spring it on each other. It became a standing joke in our family even after all us kids were married and had our own children. He posted it to me once, and when emails became a thing, I scanned it and emailed it to him. I even had a milk bottle printed with the design and left it in his fridge. In February 2009, my dad suddenly died from a heart attack. We were all broken. I left the hospital that first night absolutely bereft. Early next morning I drove to my sister's house to be with my mum, who couldn't bear to go home that night. I parked on her drive as the car was in our garage. We spent the day calling people and doing all those awful first things. It was emotionally exhausting, and I was still very much in a daze. I left to go home early evening, and I remember I hadn't even got to the end of the road when my phone started ringing. There was no hands-free then, so I let it ring off. But by the time I was home, I had probably 10 missed calls. I only lived 10 minutes drive away. I thought something really bad had happened, so I rang my sister back before I even got out of the car. She said my brother-in-law was hysterical. He'd watched me pull off their driveway, and as I was clear, there was a blue ribbon wrapper left on the driveway. I got out of my car in a bit of shock, but also a kind of weird happiness. And the next few days were more of the same. The worst was going to register the death and visit the funeral directors. And I remember coming home weary of the grief, but as I walked up to my doorway, which was set back in a porch with ivy growing on the front, but also into the open porch, I saw something tucked in the hedge as I put my key in. And stuffed right in between the curling ivy was a blue ribbon wrapper. I banged on the door and called my husband, pointed and said, "Did you do this?" He said no and was half laughing. And I said, "I won't be mad if you did it to make me feel better." And he promised to this day that he didn't. And yes, you could think, well, it's just blown from the rubbish bins, but I hadn't had any of those biscuits in my house, and I hadn't for a long time. My son was 3 when my dad died, and they had a lovely relationship. He was the first grandson, and they shared a love of guitar and music. He would run to my parents' back room whenever we went over to get my dad off his computer to play Rock Band. Dad played, he sang. I didn't tell him Grandad had died. Didn't think he'd understand at his young age, so life kind of went on. Even then we'd go see my mum and he'd run into the back room and then back again to the front to sing and pretend play guitar. And about a year or 18 months after Dad had died, I was upstairs at my parents' house changing my son's clothes as he'd gotten muddy from the garden. And he said out of nowhere, "Grandad's lovely, isn't he?" And I said yes, trying not to get tearful. And he said, "He's with his father now." And I remember asking, "What?" And then he said, "No, not his father, his brother." For some context, we never used the word father. It was always dad in our family, so it was a bit unusual for him to say that at 4.5 years of age. I did ask him, "Where is Grandad?" And he pointed over to the big armchair in the corner of the room and said, "Over there," and then ran off. And I found it both heartwarming but also worrying was my son seeing Dad every time we visited Mum. So about a year later we went again to Mum's after school on a Friday. It was our routine by then. And my son ran in, as he always did, but this time came running back to the hallway where I hadn't even got my shoes and coat off. And he was panicked and really tearful, and he said, "Where's Grandad?" And he shouted, "Where is he? Where is he? Has he gone to work?" Mum and I looked at each other, not really knowing what to say, and I remember Mum walked off. She didn't want him to see her crying. And I sat on the stairs with my son and I hugged and tried to calm him a bit. And he said it again. He said, "Where is he?" And I paused and said, "Well, the thing is..." And before I could get the words out, he said, oh no, he's not died, has he?" His eyes were so wide and tearful, like he was hearing it for the first time, which can't be true because he must have heard us talking over the years. And I said, yes, he has. But quite a while ago now. He looked very confused but didn't say anything else and just went off and started playing quietly. He never mentioned it again. My sister has had a few experiences too, mainly if she was in her garden and felt cold, she'd get a sensation like someone was putting a coat on her shoulders. She could feel the weight of it. And I do think maybe my dad stayed around for a bit for each of us, and even now little things still happen, but never have I seen a blue ribbon wrapper. But then it would be my turn, really. Thank you to Sarah for sharing her paranormal experience. And now, let's get into our last. As a kid, I grew up in the 80s and 90s and was fascinated by the paranormal. Pretty much devouring every book on the subject from libraries in my region, magazines, TV shows, whatever I could get my hands on. In 1999, I moved from the north of the UK to the Midlands to go to university. And after the first year, I moved into a terrace house with some mates. And for people outside of the UK, terrace houses are joining together in long rows, typically with no side access. Access is only by the front door or the rear alley. And this street was particularly long, and our house was number 219. It was near the end of this long street with a dead end. Pardon the pun, because it then backed onto a cemetery. For 2 years I lived there happily before my housemates graduated and moved out. Art courses required an extra year before university, so it meant I had another year to go. New housemates moved in and I soon made new friends. And one guy worked night shifts at a 24-hour pool hall. It was a popular and welcoming place throughout the week, but after a while I heard him mentioning strange happenings experienced by him and the staff there. And this rekindled my interest for the unknown, and I joined him for a series of evenings that ranged from nothing to very unusual and creepy. I wanted more, so I discovered a very well-established local group of enthusiasts who did regular investigations into a variety of locations. And for the next year, I was fortunate to join them, and we covered some fascinating places. What I liked was that, like me, they were very objective and level-headed in their approach and respectful of locations, their owners, and also the possible supernatural occupants. It was run by a husband and wife, and making friends with both of them, we usually had movie nights and hung out the night before monthly meetings or investigations. Doing this kind of paranormal stuff makes you a bit of a night owl, so it wasn't unusual to be watching movies and chatting until the early hours. So it meant sometimes I stayed in their guest room. Over time, they confided in me that a few weird things had happened in the house, and I soon picked up on this and noticed some odd things that soon escalated with multiple witnesses. There was disembodied voices or noises, moving shapes and shadows in the periphery, and one time heavy clunking footsteps on their upstairs landing area. After I graduated, I got a full-time job and I remained in the same house while I looked for a rental place. It made financial sense for me, and a year later my housemates also graduated. We were all moving on to the next stages of our lives, and soon I was the only person left in the home. My room was the first room upon entering the front door, a converted living room area to help maximise the rental income for the landlord. and it had a modern wood door with a solid Yale lock, which was on all rooms for the sake of privacy and security for housemates. The room had a bay window with a modern double glazing, and the thinner angled sides opened with lockable handles. The whole house had the same double glazing and secure windows. The rear access to the house was next to impossible. The tall gate and the brick wall yard was full of stuff, bins and the like. The back door was also double glazed and double locked, same as the front door. No way to break in without making a lot of noise. One night, I was in bed reading. The night before we had done an investigation, so I was still in night owl mode, and it was past midnight, and I was trying to get sleepy. I put aside the book and was laying down. I was on my side facing the door. The street was pretty much silent, as was the house. Then, as I was adjusting to the quiet, I noticed the almost imperceptible sound coming from the kitchen. It was something moving on the floor, footsteps, and whatever it was, it made gentle sounds as I could hear each step on the carpet in the living room next to me. I was pretty much alert and tuned in at that stage, and kind of growing fear of these sounds, wondering how somebody had broken in. But these weren't sounds of somebody sneaking around. They weren't looking for things to steal. It was movement towards my room, and it was slow, pretty confident and direct. Then I noticed, as the steps got closer and easier to hear, that it was something on all four legs, not two. There was no way that any animal could have entered into the house without me knowing about it. And the steps kept coming to my door and then stopped. I couldn't hear breathing or any sounds of any sort that might help me identify what kind of animal this was. And then slowly, gently, I heard paw and clawing marks on the floor repeatedly. Nothing forceful or aggressive. I don't know if something wanted in or wanted me to open the door, but now I was paralysed in fear. Wide awake, focused on the door, wondering if I could get out through the other side of the window onto the street and what I could do. Call the police, a neighbour. I should be clear at this point that the house next door was a mirror of this one, owned by the same landlord for university students. Also, at this point my friends had all moved out a while ago. The house was locked and empty. The house on the other side of me was for sale and also empty. So this scratching continued. Same speed, pressure, rhythm. It was letting me know that it was there. And after what felt like an eternity, I tried to keep calm, remain level-headed, and simply tried to ignore the sounds. And I forced myself to sleep in the hopes that nothing else would happen. The next morning I woke, opened the door to nothing. No marks on the door, no indication of a break-in. Any way an animal could enter into the house. And I went room to room and cleared the house of any possible explanation. And then I went to work. And I remained in that house for about another month before I moved out, but nothing else ever happened. One night with one unexplainable incident. And I still wonder if this was tied to the activity in my friend's house or if it was a result of the investigations that we did. We don't mess with the Ouija board, antagonise or practice dangerous or aggressive methods. But did something follow us to their home and then mine? I guess we'll never know. And thank you to John for sending in our last paranormal experience. Don't forget, if you have your own paranormal experience you'd like me to narrate on the show, you can send it to scaryaparanormalpodcast@gmail.com, and it just might get made into a future episode. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode, and join me next time for another episode of Scary.
You're locked into a lot of things you can't change. Weather, traffic. Hey, stay in your lane! Your wireless carrier's latest price hike. But you can unlock a better way. Unlock the savings at Boost Mobile and save up to $600 a year. Switch to the $25 a month unlimited wireless plan. No contracts, no price hikes, and you keep your phone. Stop being locked into their games. Unlock the savings at boostmobile.com/unlock. Based on average annual single line of payment of AT&T, Verizon, and T-Mobile customers compared to 12 months on the Boost Mobile unlimited wireless plan as of January 2026. For full offer details, visit boostmobile.com.
Are you noticing your car insurance rate creep up even without tickets or claims? You're not alone. That's why there's Jerry, your proactive insurance assistant. Jerry handles the legwork by comparing quotes side by side from over 50 top insurers, so you can confidently hit buy. No spam calls, no hidden fees. Jerry even tracks rates and alerts you when it's best to shop. Drivers who save with Jerry could save over $1,300 a year. Don't settle for higher rates. Download the Jerry app or visit jerry.ai/ACAST today.
Traigan la manguera, que son 45.
Cuando cumples 45, te toca soplar muchas velas y examinarte contra el cáncer de colon, ya que al detectarse temprano es más tratable en 9 de cada 10 personas. Usa la prueba de Cologuard en la privacidad de tu casa y envíala de regreso para obtener tus resultados. La prueba de Cologuard es una opción con receta para detectar el cáncer de colon en personas de 45 años o más con riesgo promedio. Resultados positivos deben ir seguidos de una colonoscopía. Pueden darse resultados falsos positivos y falsos negativos. La prueba de Cologuard no reemplaza la colonoscopía en pacientes de alto riesgo. No uses Cologuard si has tenido adenomas, si tienes enfermedad inflamatoria intestinal y ciertos síndromes hereditarios o un historial personal o familiar de cáncer de colon. Pide la prueba de Cologuard a tu médico. Para más información en español, visita cologuard.com/prueba.
Boost Mobile is now sending experts nationwide to deliver and set up customers' new phones.
Wait, we're going on tour?
We're delivering and setting up customers' phones. It's not a tour.
Not with that attitude.
Introducing Store to Door. Switch and get a new device with expert setup and delivery.
Delivery available for select devices purchased at boostmobile.com.
Hey, this is Paige DeSorbo from Giggly Squad, and today I want to talk to you about Boost Mobile. Quick question, why are we letting our phone bills bully us? Here's a money tip. Stop paying a carrier tax. When you bring your own phone and switch to Boost Mobile's $25 unlimited forever plan, you can unlock up to $600 in savings. That's real-life money, not money trapped in a pricey phone bill. $600 is a trip, a shopping spree, or paying something off. Your money belongs in your life. You get unlimited data, talk, and text for $25 a month with no contracts and no minimum line requirement. Your phone, your rules. Head to boostmobile.com to switch today and unlock the savings you actually deserve. After 30 gigabytes, customers may experience lower speed. Customers pay $25 per month while active on Boost Mobile Unlimited plan. Savings claim based on a January 2026 Boost Mobile survey comparing average annual payments of major carrier customers to 12 months on the Boost Mobile Unlimited plan. Visit boostmobile.com for details.
Traigan la manguera, que son 45.
Cuando cumples 45, te toca soplar muchas velas y examinarte contra el cáncer de colon, ya que al detectarse temprano es más tratable en 9 de cada 10 personas. Usa la prueba de Cologuard en la privacidad de tu casa y envíala de regreso para obtener tus resultados. La prueba de Cologuard es una opción con receta para detectar el cáncer de colon en personas de 45 años o más con riesgo promedio. Resultados positivos deben ir seguidos de una colonoscopía. Pueden darse resultados falsos positivos y falsos negativos. La prueba de Cologuard no reemplaza la colonoscopía en pacientes de alto riesgo. No uses Cologuard si has tenido adenomas, si tienes enfermedad inflamatoria flora intestinal y ciertos síndromes hereditarios o un historial personal o familiar de cáncer de colon. Pide la prueba de Cologuard a tu médico. Para más información en español, visita cologuard.com/prueba.
¡Nos vas a volar a todos!